Robert,
Hi,
welcome.
thanks for having me.
We're so pleased to have you today, and it's so generous of you to take some time to answer some questions for us.
Uh, really, it's an honor to be asked to be a part of this. So hopefully, there's something that can be helpful to someone that I.
Yeah. So before we start, I want to ask you, where are you calling from?
So I am in Belfast in not my apartment. I've been here with my family since November, prepping a Viking movie that it went on hiatus a week before we were going to go into production. So I'm just hunkered down in Belfast, and yeah,
Well, I can't
happy to
imagine.
be here.
I can't imagine what that feels like. Uh, but in the meantime, now that you have a little time, we'll sort of move forward with the questions.
Great.
So my first question to you is, what is your most vivid memory from childhood?
I'm sure there's many. I mean, unfortunately, the one that comes to mind is something that I probably wouldn't normally share, but since I'm on the spot, it's what came to my head. Uh, my father had a seizure,
Mm.
a very bad seizure on Christmas Eve, and I was like in my boxer shorts in the snow. He was outside on the ground seizing, and my grandfather ran out and was screaming my name, and his voice was so like uh, alarmed that it didn't sound like him. It sounded I had never heard him sound like that before. So great way, great way to
Wow,
start the conversation.
striking image. How old were you when that? You remember?
Uh, I think 14. So maybe a little younger. I don't know.
Who were your early influences when you were coming of age?
I mean, like every good American kid, I mean, I was into Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Spielberg and all that kind of thing, and Tim Burton became uh, someone who I really admired, and but then I kind of grew away from that. Basically, I had um, I met this painter who his name is Hyman Bloom. He was living in Nashua, New Hampshire, and my father was a professor at the University of New Hampshire, and Hyman Bloom had a show there, and I met him, and my parents invited him and his wife over for dinner, and he knew that I was into drawing at the time, and I was into comic books, and he gave me some books on Durer and the Northern Renaissance, and kind of said, if you can draw then you can draw anything. And that made me sort of throw away my comic books and slowly sort of turn my back on American pop culture stuff. Yeah, and now unfortunately I'm still like a bit snobby, and I think that I sometimes am missing out because I don't want to watch or read or listen to things that aren't in a select space that where my imagination likes to hang out and play.
What is the movie that changed your life?
Nosferatu. Yeah. So a little later on during all that, I saw Nosferatu when I was quite young. Actually, I like in elementary school, I saw a picture of Max Schreck as Orlok in a book about vampires in the school library, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so my mom helped me track down, like, we went to like a video store that was 30 minutes away, and ordered it to come in the mail, and I watched it a lot. I was really, I mean, it's very haunting, and as E. Elias Marriage did in his Shadow of the Vampire, I mean, there's this idea that like Orlok was really a vampire, and you could feel that. But basically, I did later on when I was in high school, I did a cardboard senior directed play of Nosferatu, and a local, theater impresario saw this high school play and then invited me to do a more professional version of it in his theater. And it was, again, a very modest thing, like but it in a storefront in Dover, New Hampshire. But it that sort of cemented this as a career path for me.
Do you think your work is in any way autobiographical?
It has to be to work, I think. I think we all, I certainly need to draw from my personal experiences and my memory in order to imbue any kind of credibility in my work, especially since I'm doing stuff that takes place in other time periods that I like and is not part of my everyday experience. I have to like make this is a precious way of talking about, but I have to make every moment in the film as if it were my memory of it, and certainly with The Witch, out of the two things that feature films that has been made of mine, The Witch is drawn from a lot of personal experience. And my brothers, when they read the script for the first time, said, well, I know that they're speaking early modern English, but it sounds like our family argument, so. Interesting.
What is the least favorite part of the artistic process for you? The part you like least?
I mean, obviously money. Yeah. I mean,
budgets and
there's a discipline in a budget, which can be a good thing because because you have to prioritize your story and your choices, and it makes you take a magnifying glass to all of your choices. So that's good. But I think, but where you feel like you're having to sell yourself or in order to get something done, that's when money's not good and frustrating.
What is the part you like best?
I don't. I mean, I guess so many things. I love, obviously, when you have those moments of inspiration within yourself where it just sort of, it's a lightning bolt and it just kind of happens and there's nothing else you can say. But I think collaboration is so joyful. And collaborating with my DP and my designers, the Lighthouse and the Viking movie I wrote with other writers, which was, the passing back and forth a scene and having it's like it's such an incredible feeling because it's not competitive exactly, but you are just each trying to like kick it up further, and it's I don't know, it's a very wonderful feeling. But and that same collaboration, I love to be on set. I come from theater, so when you're in production and and like yourself, I like, I'm get the opportunity to like create this world. I'm in my like Disneyland, and that's super fun.
Tell us about your fascination with archaic forms in terms of production design, costumes, dialect, camera technique.
I think it comes from I mean, look, the way I generally talk about it is that I'm interested in things that touch the sublime and or endeavor to, and the genre that does that today is generally science fiction, which makes sense in current culture. But I'm more interested in learning or exploring where, who we are and where we're going from where we came from. And the past has always been something that I've been interested in, and I don't know exactly where that comes from. I think I had a very close relationship with my grandfather, and he collected antiques and went to a lot of antique stores. I do think that that's got to be part of it, and also my father is a Shakespeare professor. I'm sure that's got to be part of it. I think growing up in New England and all with all these ramshackle colonial farms and family plots in the middle of the woods, that was a great mysterious environment for my imagination to play as a kid. So I think that's all kind of.
I definitely relate to that. Give us a little window into your research process, which seems to be so extensive.
Well, I mean, I read a lot of books, and I read, I go to the library, I find stuff online, and I read everything. I mean, to extremely academic journals that I have a really hard time wading through, to children's books. I mean, and back and forth. So like when it's a topic that I really don't know anything about, I like to kind of sink my teeth into things that are a bit difficult for me. And then once I think I've got my footing, then it's great to read like an introductory college textbook or literally a children's book and get kind of what is the worldview you're supposed to have after I've kind of started to shape my own thinking. And I and I watched films, and I mean with the Viking business, there's secondary source material by all kinds of Viking historians and archaeologists. There's the primary source material that's the sagas that was written later in the Viking Age. And then there's accounts by Arab and Spanish Muslim explorers and diplomats who came in contact with Vikings from the period. And then again, as I said, there's children's books and there's podcasts, and I just kind of, it's just as much as I possibly can get. So, I think when it comes to something like the Lighthouse or The Witch, where I'm working with my brother to create or recreate a dialect, that's a different kind of discipline, which comes from collecting when you're reading the material where the people speak that way. I make sort of my own thesaurus of different phrases that I might use in a certain situation. But we also, with The Witch, there are books about early modern English because it's the age of Shakespeare and Spenser and um, and so on. So you have some guidance there. But for the Lighthouse, it was much more difficult to find rules for the way working people spoke a long time ago. But thankfully, there was this author, Sarah Orne Jewett, who was writing in Maine in our period, and then in the 19th century, and she was writing in dialect. And she was like interviewing sailors and farmers and writing her stories in dialect. And then my wife found a woman who did her dissertation on dialect in Jewett, who provided rules, which was really very helpful. It was a little scattered, but you know. Whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all in an effort to create a complete, fully realized world.
I think the point is that, like, again, because I need to know the material well enough so that I can be integrated into something that can be mine. And I think, and I'm after, like, there's nothing good or better about being accurate, and period accurate. Peter Brook's King Lear, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, those are great examples of created worlds that I totally buy and work perfectly well for the story. But you know, for me, this is my way in.
Who's your imagined audience, if you think about such things?
I mean, the people that I'm most hoping to excite, I suppose, are the uninitiated. Like, I know that, like, the A24 core audience, you know, might like what I'm after, and I know that, like, my goth adjacent hipster friends will like it, and my wife's like, you know, pseudo Jungian psychologist friends will be into, you know, that's fine. But what's exciting is someone who I don't think would actually necessarily go to see the Lighthouse who appreciates it. And the other thing that, I mean, I don't write or make my movies thinking you know, this is for 16-year-old high school students, but, like, that's another, you know, I hope that this can be, if you know, for people who, you know, like myself, you know, whoever whatever the Star Wars, Spielberg, Tim Burton equivalent is today, for maybe some kid to say, oh, I haven't seen a movie like that. I didn't know you could tell a story like that. Like, you know.
What movie makes you cry?
The Sun by the Dardenne brothers. That always works.
Why?
Just the escalating tension, and it all builds up to this, you know, moment of catharsis. You know, and yeah, I haven't seen it in a while, so I feel like I can't talk about it with a lot of specificity at the moment, but I know that, you know, I've seen it 3 or 4 times and I've cried every time.
What is your greatest fear?
Well, you know, I guess it's on a scale. I think, you know, immediately, like, not to be able to do my work, but you know, really.
So you're experiencing it right this moment. So you're experiencing it in a way.
In a way, I mean, I'm still able to. We're still doing some work, and I'm able to do some things. But I think finally, to be alone would be worse.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, I have one last question, and then we're going to open it up to the students. The last question is, what advice would you give students in this moment of peril?
Gosh, in this moment,
Yes.
I would just it's fun. I have my like usual like 5 bullet points of advice, but in this moment, I think hope is the best thing we can have, and also just remember that we need stories to survive as human beings. You know, the film industry might be on its head for a couple of years, you know, but it's so, I mean, we you know, we need these stories to understand who we are as humans, and to and if, you know, and if all else fails, I mean, we can do street theater around the garbage fire, the post-apocalyptic garbage fires, you know. So it's what you're doing is important, and we'll find a way, because people need. I mean, what are people doing at home? Like they're watching TV and watching movies and, you know, reading books.
Ready for some questions from the students? Great advice. Michael, first question. Marcellus.
Oh, hey.
Hi.
Yeah, so, you know, I was wondering, so a lot of artwork that's kind of tied to horror or tied to genres can, you know, the talk around it can often get kind of tied up in the tropes and the tools of the genre, rather than like what those tools are sort of being used to sort of talk about. And I think a lot of times horror is actually kind of one of the most interesting ways to really talk about anything, I think. And I was just wondering, you know, as an artist who will sort of use a genre, how do you choose like what to hold on to and what to not hold on to?
Good question.
That is a good question. I mean, sadly, I think the truthful answer is that it's instinctual, and that, you know, I think the Lighthouse, for example, which uses many genre tropes in like a very ham-fisted way, it was certainly trial and error, you know, and I think that there were versions of the script that were too clear, but it was me and my brother's intention that the story would, I mean, there's not much of a narrative anyway, but would continue to devolve narratively, and we would become confused, like Robert Pattinson's character, and trying to find things to like hang on to. So in that particular, to use Lighthouse as an example, we were oftentimes like, you know, cutting things tropes that were too clear, but then set up other things in ways that are really over the top. I don't know. I think it's just instinct. Sorry to say.
Yeah.
Rachel.
Hi. Longtime Gothic adjacent hipster here. I'm just wondering, it goes back, I'm going back to using the old film form as a tool, or using the tropes in order to kind of convey really abstract concepts that those old films were trying to convey. And I'm just wondering, like, are you thinking about that? And what do you think this interest in old form now says about the kind of cultural landscape we're living in? What does it mean to be so invested in silent film, or in the history of early moving pictures?
Well, I think, I mean, part of it is just reactionary, right? Like, you know, in the way that, speaking about hipsters again, that, you know, that there was a time when the whole Brooklyn thing was the 19th century, and everyone and there's still a good deal of that, and as people are getting really excited and moving forward with digital technology, a lot of my friends are doing tintypes. I think part of it's just sort of reactionary to progress, whether that's good or bad. I think it just kind of happens. As far as the look and feel of the lighthouse, the lighthouse is very, very, very self-aware, for better and for worse, and so there is a way in which that the format that we used conveys the atmosphere of the story better than we could have done any other way. That's really why we chose it. But the aspect ratio is the best aspect ratio for telling this confined story and articulating the claustrophobia, and the orthochromatic filter and the XX film stock has a texture that it suits the film better than something else. But it also does say old. And for people who, on a very simple level, to like any audience, it says, this is old timey. And then to someone like yourself, you might start thinking about, whatever your references are, like Pabst and Jean Gremillon and whoever. But and that's fine too, and that's fine too. I think the Tarkovsky would argue that the purist cinema, you wouldn't want to be, you wouldn't want the audience to step out ever and think of the influence or the reference. And that could be true. But that certainly wasn't what we were doing,
Mickey.
Hi, thank you for being here. You've kind of already mentioned this, but I guess I'll still ask just in case. But the term style comes up a lot in our crits, and I can't tell if it's something that we should embrace or run away from. And for you, I guess I was wondering whether or not you have an argument for the benefits of style within one's work, or more broadly, what the role of style plays within your work.
I don't think of style. I think of just trying to be myself and bring what's unique to me, or try to, in the work that I create. So therefore, like, that is like my style, I suppose. I think we the camera language in The Lighthouse is particularly aggressive and has a certain style, which I think, doesn't work for a lot of things. One of my favorite filmmakers is Ken Loach, whose like camera work doesn't have a lot of style. It's basic. It's serviceable. It does the job, but the content that his camera's capturing is so potent that it doesn't really matter. But then like Michael Haneke, that's so restrained that that becomes style in itself. So I think I think there's always style, and to use Tarkovsky again. I mean, I think in how he would talk about Parajanov and Bresson and all the sort of canonical 20th century art house auteur types, that they're just trying to do their own, they're their own genre, and that is their sort of inherent style, if that makes sense.
Nabil.
Hello, thank you so much for coming and spending time with us and talking today. You touched on the importance of language in your work, and I really liked what you said about, you mentioned something about you were speaking with your brother and talking about the language and the witch, and that something about it was familiar or recognizable to you. I was wondering if you could go a little bit more into that and talk about that more.
Well, just my brothers were saying that while they were speaking like Puritans, that it still felt like our family arguing. So I think there is a scene where the mother and the father are having a disagreement that could be my parents' disagreement or could be me and my wife's disagreement, but it's just spoken with an older do a different dialect, but it's the same conversation. And I think and I don't, except for when I'm trying to convey certain points of exposition, I very rarely translate from I don't write modern dialogue and then translate it. I generally just try write in the dialect and then revise, because thinking in a dialect does, now I'm getting away from your point, but thinking in dialect does get you to sort of think outside yourself and express things differently in a way which is nice, but that contradicts my whole point I was making in the first place. But hey, that's part of it too, is that you contradict yourself, and you're just trying to make your work.
No, contradiction's always good. Dylan is our next question.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
I'm wondering if you feel like there's a common thread throughout your storytelling that makes a story worth telling, and what that is.
I mean, it's worth telling to me, or I wouldn't do it. But I don't. I can't judge its worth, if you will. I think something inspires me and I start working on it, and sometimes I'll spend months on something and throw it away and realize this is not a story worth telling, and this is not a story that I'm passionate enough about to keep going or whatever. I think on a certain level, it's just you have to be guided by your instinct, but also I'm guided by the market and what people are going to finance. I've written things that I thought were really great and no one wanted to make them, so there you go. And so I'm always working on several things at the same time in case something falls apart. Obviously there are plenty of things in common with The Witch and The Lighthouse, and all my things that I have written that haven't gotten made, and my 2 short films that aren't terrible that are out there. There are, I think most authors have a primal narrative. Very few people are Shakespeare's or Twain's who have a lot of stories to tell. Most people are Charles Dickens and they tell the same fucking story over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm sure that is me. Not that I'm Dickens, but you get my point.
Yeah, thanks.
I've lost your audio.
I'm being muted. Oh, hi.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Rory, next question.
All right. Well, Greg, you kind of took my question. I was going to ask about research because I'm just reading about The Witch, and I grew up outside of Salem too, and just interesting. I'm also curious about in the lighthouse, just sort of the staging and the performances. I feel like it's like it's a part that's like overlooked a lot with the cinematography, which is great. But I mean, to me, there was such like this that had so much this this homage to theater, you know, and this sort of like really theatrical staging. And I was wondering, with your background, can you talk to anything about that, like a two-man show?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's no way that something like that with that much dialogue is not going to feel theatrical unless you, I mean, I honestly think even if you did it with traditional coverage, like it would have felt theatrical. But I think because we're holding longer and we, you know, only get into reverse shot when it is necessary, I think that becomes more theatrical. I think that, you know, there are times in Mike Leigh and Bergman and, you know, that there's times when it can feel like photographed plays. And of course there's, you know, a handful of good Pinter plays that have been made into films, and certainly Pinter's, the Pinter-Losey collaborations, you know, have a little bit of that flavor too. You know, but I think finally though, particularly with Bergman and Mike Leigh, it's, you know, directors who know what is powerful about theater and what can work about a lot of dialogue, even on screen. You know, and I guess I was trying to chase that, but again, yeah, I come from theater, and I know. And you know, and I do rehearsals, but the rehearsals are really just for blocking, not so much for finding the scene the way you would in theater. I try to have the actors not give their all in rehearsals for film, even though I would expect them to be giving 110% if it was theater. For the Lighthouse, though, because there's so much dialogue, we did need to at least get a sense of pace so that I could know that it could work. And I think because Willem comes from theater himself, he was happy to just like give 110% like during the rehearsal period, which was a lot of fun.
Awesome, thank you. You're muted, Gregory.
Okay. Sorry, the mowers were here, believe it or not, bad timing. But we have time for one last question, which is from Farzad. Is he here?
Robert.
Yes.
Do you have my voice? Yes. Hello, Robert. Thank you for joining us. I wanna ask about your creative process more. I mean, both of your films, Witch and Lighthouse, is for me is more of a combination of different ideas. That's from classic literature, cinema, and ancient mythology, and at the same time, the complex storytelling, this puzzlement of storytelling that is more contemporary. Mm-hmm. And I want to know that in the process of making the films, how you protect this creative process, how you control it or balance it, and how you protect it, and how you make it practical.
I don't know. I mean, I think because I mean, I have watched a lot of films, and I watch a lot of films, and like when I talk about The Lighthouse, I talk about Melville and Stevenson and Poe and Mackin and Lovecraft and James, M.R. James, and I talk about the dialect work, but you know, but obviously, like all of Bergman's films on Fura like are a huge inspiration, and the nautical films of Jean Gremillon, and even random things like the jerky, the choreographed camera movements in Fritz Lang's early sound films, where he's like, his ideas for the shots are too advanced for his camera equipment, and the way that it's sort of primitive, and he can't quite do it. All these things like are mixed in, certain things that I'm trying to draw from, certain things I'm trying to ignore, but they just come to the surface anyway. And but again, but and of course, and of course, and all, yeah. So I think you have your idea of what this movie is, and you just keep trying things until it feels like what you first imagined. And then that's not helpful, but it sort of is true. And again, I'm not Tarantino. There's not like, the first draft is not filmable. It takes a lot of time and consideration, and as you say, like weighing these different things and balancing these different things before you have something that can work. And then the next thing is to then bring on your collaborators to challenge you. And I think that I am very specific, great, and I know what I want, cool. But I think a lot of times my preconceived notion about how to articulate my intention is not always the best. And it's through collaboration that I can often be guided to something better than my preconceived notion that is actually closer to my original intention. And it takes collaboration to get there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. And I just want to personally say thank you for the beautiful, really stunning work you do. It's
Thank you.
Glorious, and it's particularly from a photographer's point of view, it's really very enriching and profound. And also want to wish you the very best of luck on the new film. And I'm sure it's going to be worth the wait for all of us. And then I'm going to ask the 300 students here from New Haven and beyond to thank you also through applause. And it's been our great pleasure, and can't wait to see what happens next.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Your earnestness is very charming, and I appreciate it, especially because, I also admire you very much. So thanks, everybody. And, hang in there.
And apologize for the mowers, too.
Okay.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.